Hello guys, thanks very much for watching this presentation. Today we're going to present the findings of our research project titled Flipped Classroom Practices in ELT Program. Ready for this transition? My name is Edgar Emmanuell García Ponce. I am a full-time teacher from the University of Guanajuato.
Hello everybody, my name is Lisa Conaway and I'm also a teacher from the University of Guanajuato.
And I'm Irasema Mora Pablo, and I also work at the University of Guanajuato.
Hello, my name is Lisa Conaway, and my colleagues and I would like to present to you our research, Flipped Classroom Practices in an ELT Program. Ready for this transition? On the right side of the screen, you will see the names of my colleagues and the order that we will be presenting. I will talk to you about the introduction, literature review, and methodology. Let's start from talking about flipped classroom definition. A flipped classroom is a pedagogical approach in which direct instruction moves from the group learning space to the individual learning space, and the resulting group space is transformed into a dynamic, interactive learning environment where the instructor guides students as they apply concepts and engage creatively in the subject matter. Content information such as lectures, reading materials, videos, presentation is provided in distance sessions through the use of technology. And then the teacher and students meet into a face-to-face session to discuss or put into practice what was learned in the distance session. What are the learning benefits? The benefits of these combined teaching practices are that students retain and process information better than using traditional practices. Learning more independently in flipped classrooms fosters their autonomy by placing the responsibility on them not only inside the classroom but at home in a way that is more scaffolded. Teachers can maintain active and self-paced learning and better use of experience, knowledge, and teacher abilities by focusing on in-class activities. This methodology, as previously mentioned, combines face-to-face and distance sessions alternatively in order to maximize class time benefits of in-class activities and student participation. As you can see in this infographic, this is the flipped class design process, where outside of class, we have to select content, select the delivery method, and create or find content. In class, we assess, select activities, and coach the students. So what are the challenges from a learning perspective? Well, students, first of all, may feel that we're adding workload and they will not be very certain of their success. They may struggle with flipped classroom practices when they do not have any experience in methodology, or if they feel that they are being made responsible for their own learning. We have to consider that these are legitimate fears because they are used to traditional classroom environments here in Mexico. So this may take considerable time to overcome. So considering all the points previously mentioned, this brought us to ask ourselves, what are the students' views and experiences in the flipped classroom whose aims were to teach technology and pedagogical content?
Now I will describe the study. And the course exploring this study prepares students for planning and designing activities and lessons with the use of technology. This class is part of a BA in ELT at a state university in central Mexico, which trains students to become English teachers. The learning objectives are to encourage students to use different online platforms and apps to design resources which they can use to teach English. The flipped learning approach to this class was introduced at the beginning of the semester. At the beginning of the semester, the students were highly motivated about learning in flipped practices. However, their motivation and engagement were perceived by the teachers to lower as the weeks went by in the semester. The study does set out to understand the students' experiences from learning in this flipped classroom, which was new to them, and also to understand how to best address the possible challenges that they were facing in this flipped classroom. 19 students participated in the study. They were 17 females and 2 males. Their ages ranged from 19 to 21 years old. To collect the data, we conducted focus groups. During the focus groups, a list of 10 open-ended questions was used. The focus groups lasted from 25 to 30 minutes each, were transcribed in their entirety and translated into English by one native speaker of Spanish and then checked by a native speaker of English. To analyze the data, we carried out a meaning categorization in order to achieve data reduction and be able to process and analyze the information. Now, I'm going to present some findings of this study. Well, in the 2 focus groups that we conducted, it was evident that the students were able to describe the characteristics of a flipped classroom and their role in carrying out online practices. For example, some participants said the following. It can be seen in these extracts the students' descriptions of a flipped classroom as a virtual class, not being in the classroom physically, and on an online class. In general, their responses reveal positive attitudes towards the online practices. Well, the students also expressed some benefits which they perceived in the flipped classroom. This is suggested in these extracts. As expressed by student 3, she claims that in the flipped classroom, she is able to manage her time more efficiently for planning and submitting her assignments. In students' response, in students 5 response, we can see positive attitudes towards flipped practices and negative views towards face-to-face practices. When he says they are interesting for the students because you are not only using a textbook and taking notes, they are more accessible. For students 5 and 7, a flipped classroom promotes accessibility and flexibility with practices which do not have to be carried out at a specific time. Now, let's discuss the students' lack of familiarity with the flipped classroom. The students' positive perceptions of the flipped classroom appeared to combine with several challenges that they faced in the flipped classroom. As raised by the students in the focus groups, these challenges were mostly motivated by the students' lack of familiarity with the flipped classroom approach, as discussed in these extracts. The students' responses here generally suggest their lack of familiarity with a flipped classroom. These data also show that this lack of familiarity was a major problem, a major factor that motivated several challenges that they perceived to face in the flipped classroom. In these extracts, we can also see that the lack of familiarity perceived by the students in turn motivated struggles during the flipped practices, and also perceptions of a flipped classroom as difficult practices. And guess what? Based on those challenges, they then prefer their traditional classroom. So because of the challenges that the students faced during the flipped classroom, they stated their preference for traditional face-to-face practices, contradicting somewhat their initial perceptions about the flipped classroom as an innovative methodology in which they can learn autonomously. This is suggested in these extracts. We can see that student 14 prefers to be in a traditional classroom because this allows her to focus her attention on the activities. Her contribution also shows that she felt lost in the online classes. As suggested by students 1 and 9, they stated their preference for traditional face-to-face practices over a flipped classroom. The general reason they all provide is the presence of the teacher to provide them with immediate explanations or clarifications. In general, we can see that these students value the presence of the teacher in the classroom, and thus implying some struggles they possibly faced in the online sessions as part of the flipped classroom. Despite the fact there was a combination of online and face-to-face sessions, the students felt lost or misunderstood the dynamics of flipping the class. By claiming that they prefer to be in the classroom rather than in face-to-face communication with teacher contradicts their initial responses, which generally suggested an endorsement for online sessions and the flipped classroom in general. Especially their preference for a traditional classroom suggests that blended learning may be ineffective for maximizing learning if students are not familiar with the approach and understand the learning role in such approaches. In the area of language teacher education, this evidence is significant because it reveals the need to train future language teachers with the skills to learn and teach using blended learning methodologies.
And now we will present the discussion and conclusion. In this presentation, we have expressed our initial interest in implemented blended learning practices to teach a content class in a BA in ELT at State University in Central Mexico. This interest was partially motivated by our university's decision to start the transition from face-to-face to multimodal teaching and learning practices, and also the benefits that online and distance can have on content and language learning. Following this, we designed flipped classroom practices and carried them out during one semester in a technology class of the BA. We expected to maximize students' learning opportunities and provide them with better chances to develop a sense of autonomy and responsibility for their learning. However, we were able to notice that students were demotivated and facing several challenges. Therefore, we decided to conduct 2 focus groups with students to understand their views and experiences in the flipped classroom with a view to addressing best their challenges. In general, our data suggested that students understood the dynamics and purposes of the flipped classroom practices. Specifically, the evidence shows that students were able to verbalize the benefits of these kinds of practices, as suggested in the research literature. However, students' responses pointed to their lack of experience in flipped classrooms. This lack of familiarity had an impact on not only their feelings of being lost in the flipped classroom, but also their preference for traditional face-to-face classroom practices, as evident in the importance they attach to the role of the teacher and having detailed instructions. These views were opposed to our initial thoughts that this class was to be perceived as beneficial, and students would endorse the transition. Meanwhile, it is necessary to outline the challenges that have been encountered while implementing the flipped model. Although the current state of recording technology and web-based tools is commonly considered to be affordable, the process of producing and learning content for this type of course can be time-consuming and requires additional skills, knowledge, and an understanding of what these tools are from the instructor. Moreover, the ready-to-use course needs continuous housework, as lots of web links and supportive materials get outdated or completely disappeared on the internet. The learning content for the E part of the course must be engaging to ensure that sustained motivation of students. The forms and tools for the material delivery should meet the students' needs and interests. For example, videos rather than text, thought-provocative talks, etc. Differentiation in students' learning styles and command of the language should also be taken into account. Not all the classes can be flipped. The teacher must analyze the syllabus and choose the content or activities that are flippable and are better to be put online. At the same time, it is important that classroom time is given to higher level activities such as debates, discussions, case studies, presentations, role plays, etc. The role of an instructor in flipped classroom changes. The teachers are rather the facilitators in the learning process than the key sources of information for our students. Nevertheless, the strict control and instruction of a teacher during the student's online presentation for the class has to be visible and felt by the students, even if a flipped class employs automated assessment tools. This can be realized through forums, teachers' comments, and work with the use of synchronous mode tools. Based upon the above results, we believe that Mexican universities need to assess an array of factors. For example, students' readiness for multimodal practices, past learning experiences, skills for the use of emerging technology, among others, in order to decide if this is the right moment to implement multimodal practices. As suggested in the data, students expressed their lack of familiarity with this methodology, which in turn motivated other challenges. In order to address this, it is highly important that Mexican universities first train students as well as teachers on developing knowledge and experience using online teaching and learning practices, such as those promoted in flipped classroom practices. Time then becomes relevant in this suggestion because the more time students and teachers spend on carrying out multimodal practices, the more familiar and efficient they will become in the process. If we don't take into account consideration this, we might push students to do online learning practices against their will, having a counterproductive effect on their learning, autonomy, and responsibility. At the same time, to ensure progress, future research on the flipped classroom should be done to examine the consistency and sustainability of the obtained results. It might also be important to describe and analyze the existing tools, technologies that are mostly beneficial and less labor-consuming for effective language teaching and learning. These are our references, and thank you very much for watching this presentation. Here you have our emails if you want to contact us.